Now, there's lots of correlation aspects to that, and it's hard to pin down the actual causal factors, but nonetheless, if you don't have an enormous amount of carbohydrates in your diet, then eating saturated fat is not going to be detrimental. As a matter of fact, it's going to be beneficial to your health and your diet.
Right.
And this is in line with the much maligned Robert Atkins, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Atkins weight loss diet, because he was actually a cardiologist. So you'd think a guy that knows about the heart would know a little bit about the nature of saturated fat related to heart disease. And he correctly claimed through the evidence, looking at the research, the actual evidence from the various studies that they've done, that only when you couple high amounts of saturated fat with really high amounts of carbohydrates does it do like a double whammy on you. But It's important to understand that not many people out there in the nutrition industry are saying that a high carb diet is detrimental to you in the way that they're saying that saturated fat is bad for you. It's just completely a disconnect there, huh?
Yeah, exactly. I thought the second one was interesting. The second benefit, stronger bones. According to one of the foremost research experts in dietary fats and human health, Mary Enig, PhD, there's a case to be made for having as much as 50% of the fats in your diet as saturated fats for this reason. That's a far cry from the 7 to 10% suggested by mainstream institutions.
Indeed. And I think it would be difficult to get that percentage of saturated fat in your diet, because even if you look at a beef steak, you're still not going to get, I don't think, 50% of the fatty acids in that to be saturated.
Right.
I think it's under 50%. But anyway, I mean, the amount that people eat right now is just a scintilla of what she's recommending.
Oh, yeah.
So the third one, improved liver health. Saturated fat has been shown to protect the liver from alcohol and medications, including acetaminophen and other drugs commonly used for pain and arthritis.
Yeah, that's a big one.
So all you alcoholics out there, make sure you eat lots of saturated fat.
Yeah, have a big steak with your vodka, I guess, right?
Yeah, not necessarily advisable. Ditch the alcohol, and it's okay to eat the proteins with saturated fat in them, or cheeses. I mean, where are you going to find saturated fat? Typically, you'll find it in meats and cheeses, right?
Yeah.
And other dairy products.
Right. I don't know if we mentioned on any of the podcasts, but I know we did in the book, is coconut oil. That's got a high amount of saturated fat.
Yes.
And it's really, really healthy for you.
We like coconuts. Mm-hmm. And you have to differentiate the coconut juice from the actual coconut milk or the coconut spread.
Yeah.
Because that will have the saturated fat in it. The juice itself is, I guess they take it from unripened coconuts. It's the center liquid in there.
Right.
And did you know, ladies and gentlemen, that you can actually use this juice as blood plasma? It's actually like the same pH, and you can inject it into your veins. Not to say that I would recommend that, but people have used it apparently as blood plasma before. It's interesting, huh?
Yeah, I think you mentioned that before, and I can't remember when it was, but I remember hearing that from you. But that's pretty cool stuff.
Crazy trivia.
Yeah, so the fourth thing, healthy lungs. That's interesting. So our athlete friends out there will be happy to hear about that.
Yeah, for proper function, the airspace of the lungs have to be coated with a thin layer of lung surfactant. The fat content of lung surfactant is 100% saturated fatty acids. Replacement of these critical fats by other types of fat makes faulty surfactant and potentially causes breathing difficulties.
It also mentions that one of the problems right now is that a lot of the packaged foods, they put in partially hydrogenated fat in replacement to saturated fat, and that actually plays a role in giving people asthma.
Mm-hmm. And so the next two are kind of related, a healthy brain and proper nerve signaling. So the brains, neurons, it's all fat and cholesterol related tissue.
Right.
And the lion's share of the fatty acids in the brain are actually saturated. A diet that skimps on healthy saturated fats robs your brain of the raw materials it needs to function optimally. That's pretty interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
So certain saturated fats, particularly those found in butter, lard, coconut oil, and palm oil, that's another good oil, function directly as signaling messengers that influence metabolism, including such critical jobs as the appropriate release of insulin.
Oh, yeah.
That's a kind of a minor effect. I haven't noticed much difference there. But anyway, I'm sure there's people listening that are, again, kind of astounded that we would be advocating eating more saturated fat. And some people might say, well, chimpanzees are, 98% similar in DNA, and they don't eat much saturated fat, do they? But they have a different digestive system, obviously.
Yeah.
It's taken a few million years for us to evolve to a different system. And actually, we can do another podcast about this issue, which is cooking our food and how that has led to us having bigger brains.
Mm-hmm.
Some scientists are forwarding this notion that by breaking the food up through the cooking process, it's more easily digestible, and therefore our mouths got smaller, our teeth got smaller, but our brains got bigger as a consequence of all those, more accessible nutrients. So,
yeah, no doubt.
And number 7, huh?
Yeah, strong immune system. So it says human breast milk is actually quite rich in myristic and lauric acid, which have potent germ-killing ability. And that's one thing. The coconut oil also has the lauric acid. It says the importance of the fats lives on beyond infancy. We need dietary replenishment of them throughout adulthood, middle age, and into seniority to keep the immune system vigilant against the development of cancerous cells as well as infectious invaders. So, yeah, I think people get away from that. I mean, you have that breast milk when you're a baby, and then, everybody kind of gets away from it and goes into the high-carb diet. And then children, start getting sick, and then everybody's getting sick, and people think that it's just something that they caught. But in reality, your immune system has a lot to do with your diet. And I'm just actually getting over a cold here as we talk about this. But, I always talk about the S's that affect your immune system, the sleep, stress, and sugar. And sugar has a lot to do with it. If you're eating a lot of sugar, a lot of carbs, it's going to actually have an effect on your immune system. It's going to break it down, and you're going to be more susceptible to picking up whatever's out there, there's always stuff out there. So,
yes, all these critters are encroaching on our bodies 24/7, and it's important to keep a strong immune system.
Exactly. So yeah, that stuff really has helped me over the years avoid getting sick all the time, or even when I do get a cold, I notice that the differences between the way I used to eat, which was just, constantly eating carbs, and I used to get colds all the time. When I got a cold, I'd be sick for like 2 or 3 weeks. I'd be like on my deathbed almost, not really able to do anything. And now I'll get a cold and maybe it'll last like 5-6 days, but it's not very severe. I mean, I can really carry on with most of the things that I do. And I think it's because my immune system is much stronger now than even when it was when I was back in my college days. And, I think that's diet and also sleep. I mean, when I get a cold, I know exactly what it's from. And it's usually the lack of sleep or stressing too much about this or that.
Yeah. So for those listeners that are trying to lose weight or manage their optimal weight, how do you think they can come to terms with this consumption of saturated fat if they viewed it as somewhat bad in the past? Because this is kind of a mental game, isn't it? Because you've got so many influences in your life.
Yeah, it is a mental game. Because I've even talked to people that know all about the benefits of fat, but they won't eat it. Mm-hmm. Because it just sounds bad. Because it's like, oh no, fat, I hate that word. I don't want to be fat, so I'm not going to eat fat.
In this regard, you are not what you eat.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's just important to understand that as you make these independent decisions about what to eat and what not to eat, it serves as a good guide to keep in mind what exactly the evidence is based on, or what the assertions that are made in the mainstream are based on. And I know that Gary Taubes wrote that book, Good Calories, Bad Calories, and he tried to dispel a lot of the different myths about this issue with carbohydrates and saturated fat and heart disease and all that stuff, as well as Johnny Bowden in the Living the Low Carb Life. He's got some great studies that he references in regard to saturated fat. All the research that he did trying to track down where this myth started, he discovered there's not one study that actually shows that saturated fat is in any way bad for you. And yet there's tons of studies that show that high carbohydrate and thus insulin secretion is going to lead to a whole host of bad things. And weight gain is one of the biggest ones.
Yeah,